We are excited to begin our first panel discussion of the day, entitled Powering the Future of Tech. Moderating this discussion will be Brendan Bordelon, tech reporter at Politico. Please welcome our panelists. Rachel Appleton, public policy lead at Anthropic. Josh Parker, senior director of corporate sustainability at NVIDIA. Benjamin Schwartz, infrastructure partnerships and policy lead at OpenAI, and Dr. Thomas Zacharia, senior vice president of strategic technology partnerships and public policy at AMD.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys all hear me okay? Awesome. All right, well, as you just heard, I'm Brendan Bordelon, tech lobbying and influence reporter at Politico. Very excited to be here today. I am joined by our four distinguished panelists. You just heard who they are, so I'm not going to repeat that. We're just going to jump right into it, but thank you all for joining us. So we are here to discuss a topic that official Washington is suddenly just sort of fixated on. That's what to do about the anticipated surge in electricity consumption by really the entire AI stack, but I think particularly this sort of anticipated surge in data centers across the country and I think across the world. I actually spoke with Senator Mike Rounds. He's one of the top voices on AI in the Senate at a Politico Tech Summit last week. And he told me that if Washington doesn't get this right on energy, it could shut everything down. That was his quote when it comes to AI development in the United States. There's all sorts of agency activity. The NTIA right now is seeking comments on the potential challenges of data center growth. Yesterday, the House Science Committee marked up a bill that would task the Department of Energy with studying this issue, sort of assessing and analyzing the potential risks of runaway data center development and sort of explosion that everybody expects. And of course, earlier this month, there was a White House meeting specifically on AI and data centers that actually included the executives of most of the companies here. I don't think AMD was there, so sorry, Thomas. But and it was reported this week that in that meeting, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman pitched a plan to build a US-based network of AI data centers. Each one of the data centers would be about 5 gigawatts, which my understanding is that's like a small to medium-sized city. So pretty ambitious. Probably freaked out your former bosses at the White House a little bit, Ben, with that one. So a lot of talk in DC, but not really any proposed solutions as of yet. And I think, frankly, most policymakers in Washington don't really even have a working grasp of the problem when it comes to the gap of energy needs versus anticipated AI consumption. We can talk about all that. But I want to just go down the line and kind of ask you guys, and I guess we'll start with Ben, is the US ready to host this envisioned, vast network of energy guzzling data centers? And what's sort of your forecast for what the AI stack is going to need when it comes to energy and power in the next 5 years, 10 years? I don't know if you want to go further than that.
Yeah, so let me step a little bit back from your question to get there. Particularly in the technology community, I think the term unprecedented is thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
But occasionally it's accurate. And I think in this instance, when we say like the user adoption and the demand that we're seeing for AI, it is unprecedented. And when it comes to what that means from an infrastructure standpoint is that we're in this competition to see where this gets built, right? Because people want this, people around the world, we hope to be able to provide it to. If that infrastructure doesn't get built, it's not like AI is going to stall. It's just that a smaller number of people are going to have access to it. And it's going to be people with more resources. And at OpenAI, like part of our mission is to provide this amazing technology to as many people as possible. So as you noted, we have to build, and we're in this competition now to see can we create the environment in the United States where we're going to attract that capital that's sitting there. We've looked at the numbers, and by some estimates, there's $175 billion that's sitting in investment funds around the world waiting to be deployed. And there's a guy or a gal that's sitting there whose boss is like, by the end of this year, you need to figure out where that money's going, and it has to be related to AI. And we want to make sure that as much of that as possible is built within the United States or among our sort of friends and allies. But to do that, we have to create an environment that is attractive to that capital, where we can build efficiently, where we can get the energy grid structure set up effectively. So your question is are we prepared? Well, we'll see. We'll see. I think many times in American history, we've been in a moment where there was questions about our ability to do amazing things. And, we've been able to do it in the past. So I think it's an exciting moment, and it's going to be challenging, and it's going to require a lot of collaboration between the private and the public sector. But I mean, I'm excited. I think I think we can do this if we manage it correctly.
Sure. And I want to come back to the global competition element, but I first want to kick it to Rachel and just, I don't know if there is even numbers that you can discuss here. And obviously there's the U.S. capacity for hosting these data centers in terms of energy. There's also the global capacity. These data centers cannot possibly all be built in the U.S. But I mean, do you have a sense of what the needs might be on a numerical basis, watts or whatever you want to use, in terms of like what this is going to require, and what the U.S. could deliver in terms of the infrastructure that it has now and potentially could build in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll sort of preface or caveat my comments to say, we are a consumer of energy, right? We don't build data centers. We're not a utility, right? So we have a sort of unique space in the ecosystem, and certainly, we rely on our cloud service providers and others for that building of the computing power in the data centers. But I think, the way we've been viewing AI needs and energy needs, particularly with respect to training future model generations, and, based on things, other AI developers have said publicly, you could see, from in 2027 needing 5 gigawatts of energy potentially to conduct a training run. And certainly as, models become more capable and more powerful, inference needs, right? Inference energy will also increase. We also expect, as models become more capable, more people will use them, governments will use them, and, that will continue to draw sort of on the energy demand. So, hard to know exactly what numbers and gigawatts, megawatts to sort of throw out there, but we certainly expect those numbers to be high and for there to be a need to increase their energy capacity in the United States.
Sure. Thomas, I mean, so you worked at a national lab, a DOE national lab for quite some time. Now you're at AMD. If you sort of your broad diagnosis of the existing energy infrastructure in the United States and the capacity that you see that exists today or that could be built relatively easily. I mean, is this like totally pie in the sky? This idea of a network of multiple 5 gigawatt data centers in the U.S., or do you see that as something that's theoretically achievable in the near future?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's a great event and an important topic and a timely topic. I think I almost feel like I went to school at Oak Ridge National Laboratory for 35 years so that I can be at AMD at this particular moment to tackle some of these important challenges. At AMD, obviously, we, as a company, we are singularly focused on AI all the way from desktop to data centers, GPUs, and all the way out to the edge. And we truly believe that AI is going to have a transformative impact in terms of providing citizen services and really tackling some of the most important challenges that humanity faces, including climate change. Obviously, there's lots of issues and concerns about sustainability, climate change, et cetera. But I think that, so from a company point of view, AMD is particularly focused on doing everything that we can in terms of driving or flattening the curve from a technology perspective. But going back to your question specifically about can the U.S. accommodate this? I mean, if you look at the global projected growth, supposed to grow by about 46%, CAGR over the next 10 years or so, and the data center growth itself is about 200 terawatt hours. 50% of that is projected to be in the U.S. Okay. And if that projection is to come to pass, we have to tackle that. And so is specific to the 5 gigawatt question, since it's been brought up a couple of times, I had the opportunity, so I just want to say for history's sake, there was a time back in the 40s during the Manhattan Project, 1/6 of the entire U.S. power was consumed in Oak Ridge as part of the Manhattan Project. So U.S. has the worked experience of deploying power where it is needed, and it can still be done.
Sure.
So that's what I would say is that, there are places today that can deploy 5 gigawatts, but to have a network of 5 gigawatts, you have to bring in new power capabilities that are sustainable, and the scale in which those things are deployed is not at the same time scale as with AI is being deployed.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the 1940s and this notion that, back then we had these sort of mega projects, these moonshot projects where the government could funnel this amount of power to these kind of facilities. We were talking back there, it's not the 1940s anymore, right? It's a very different situation in Washington. I was going to say this for later, but Josh, I'm going to turn to you now for this. I mean, obviously you work at some level with the folks over here in DC and sort of the policy and political conversations here. To what extent do you see an appetite or maybe even like a capability to talk about these kind of projects that Thomas was talking about a second ago that, are going to be like funneling 1/6 of the country's power into this sort of moonshot AI development and, operation? Is that something that's feasible in your view? I mean, when you talk to folks in government, are they thinking in those terms, or are they thinking a lot sort of more smaller, granular, incremental? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Where do you sort of see the landscape in DC on this question right now?
We're certainly seeing a lot of strong interest in making sure that we get AI right and making sure that we're doing what we need to on the energy side to build the infrastructure so that AI can be deployed domestically without any unnecessary roadblocks. And I feel like this is a unique moment in our recent history, at least, where we've got a lot of bipartisan support, both for AI and to address the energy question. So I think the short answer to your question is yes. I think there's definitely appetite to address this and the capability to do that, especially when you think about this big conversation around AI and energy. There are two facts that are really important to put it in context. The first one is, as Bill Gates mentioned in his video, AI is a very small piece of the overall anticipated load growth in the United States. So even if AI grows significantly, it's a small piece of the total puzzle in terms of overall load growth. And then the other thing to consider is, as you look at some of the projections for AI energy growth, if you do a very simple extrapolation of, okay, here's how many servers are coming online for AI, here's how many chips are being sold, et cetera, the very simplistic models look alarming. But once you factor in very important variables like the very reliable improvement in energy efficiency of accelerated computing generation over generation, the math gets a lot more interesting and a lot less alarming. And just one data point that's, I think, really interesting. In the past 2 years, so just one generation of NVIDIA's product, we've increased energy efficiency for AI inference by 25 times. Not 25%, 25 times, which means 96% reduction in the energy consumed for AI inference for any given workload. So it's really dramatic improvements that we're seeing. And again, that helps put this whole idea of AI and energy demand in context. Not that we're not going to see growth that we need to try to manage in the energy load, but it's more manageable when you put it in that context.
Okay, yeah, so you're seeing a lot of efficiencies sort of accumulating rapidly when it comes to the hardware around AI. Obviously, that's what you guys do. You guys build the GPUs, the graphic processing units, and some other stuff, right, that I think sort of like feeds into the entire stack. Is that an economic question for you guys, or is that, because obviously there's a whole environmental question, and that's wrapped up in politics, and you guys do need, some support from DC, and if like, the Greenies in Congress and the Democrats saw you guys just sucking up all the power and destroying the planet, that would be a bad thing. But there's also a business case to be made too, right? That these kind of efficiencies are key. How do you guys balance sort of the environmental, the policy questions, the politics questions around this with the very real sort of, business, I think, realities of just, less energy use is great, right, for you guys? Like, how are you guys thinking about that at the companies, for AMD as well?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I really love my job right now, because you see the alignment of the economic incentives with real sustainability opportunities. And so not only on the energy efficiency, I mean, the more we can do to drive down energy per workload, the more accessible AI becomes, the cheaper it becomes, and the more we can do to unlock its potential to help us solve even bigger sustainability challenges. So applying AI to help solve carbon capture and storage, applying AI to discover new materials to help with battery storage and so forth. There are lots of opportunities for us to unlock that if we can get over this hurdle. And like I said, we're seeing a lot of support for that across the spectrum.
Thomas, is that kind of the elevator pitch you make? I don't know how often you get this question, but I hear this from folks sometimes. AI sounds fantastic, and I love playing with the latest ChatGPT variant or anything like that. But I'm not seeing necessarily the value case that's worth pumping vast sort of, to Ben's point, unprecedented amounts of energy into these sort of I think a lot of people see them as toys right now, and I know you guys might bristle at that, but this idea that are we going to be killing our climate for these kinds of tools that I think at the moment, I know there's a lot of hype, but I think a lot of regular people don't necessarily see the value. Josh was just talking about things that can be done to ameliorate climate change. What's your elevator pitch, I guess, to folks who are worried about the environmental cost of these data centers?
First of all, AMD is committed to continuing to improve energy efficiency in our product line, right? So if you think about where we are today and the next factor of 1,000, we cannot afford to just scale that. So we have to have dramatic improvements, not the business as usual improvements, which in itself is significant. And I think that is where public-private partnerships, particularly Secretary Granholm was here.
Sure.
The partnership between DOE and AMD and NVIDIA and others, there have been a number of programs that have driven energy efficiency because DOE, both through setting goals as well as through procuring supercomputers, have driven the underlying technology to be much more efficient. But also it has a pervasive efficiency and productivity gain in society. Some examples were mentioned, but I will give you a very concrete example in a completely different facet. I was in Singapore recently. Singapore Airlines and the airport is planning to double they're a hub. They're planning to double the number of passengers going through from 35 million to 70 million. Mm-hmm. Today they use 60,000 employees to service that enterprise. Singapore does not have the landmass nor the workforce to double to 120,000. They're going to do almost all that using AI. And so there are very significant use cases in terms of productivity, sustainability, new innovations that's going to be driven by the AI that is both in the science and discovery space as well as implementation space.
Sure, and you mentioned Secretary Granholm. Obviously, you spent most of your career at the Department of Energy. And you were sort of saying that it sounds like she's doing some pretty good things in this space, maybe has built a good groundwork for you guys to build on when it comes to making sure that this AI revolution is done relatively efficiently. So I saw yesterday in the House Science Committee, they were advancing this legislation that would have the Department of Energy start to assess the risks of a runaway data center growth and sort of like what to do about it. And I was sort of like, why isn't DOE doing that already? Maybe they are. So I'm curious the extent to which you just explicitly want to ask the question, you feel like DOE is prepared for this and it has already done good work in this space, or do you think there's a lot more to do?
Well, so there is a lot more to do, but I think that DOE, I am biased, and abashedly say I'm biased, but DOE as an agency, along with the 17 national laboratories that supports the enterprise and is part of that enterprise, is uniquely positioned to tackle this challenge at the intersection of energy transition and digital transition in order for delivering better citizen services. And you mentioned the House Science Committee, but there's also a very important program that DOE and the labs have talked about. This Deputy Secretary actually talked about it at one of the previous SCSP meetings called FAST, right? Which is singularly focused on driving the innovation in AI, not only in science, but also the technology impact for society-wide. So that's another, the discovery part of DOE is also an important component.
Sure, appreciate that. We're going to turn to the model side of the equation now. We talked to the hardware folks a little bit. And I think, frankly, I'm not an expert in what exactly, the amount of energy, which uses what. But my understanding is that maybe the biggest driver of energy consumption in the AI stack is the actual models, the training of the models in particular, some of the inferences and that kind of thing. Just the sheer amount of power that you need to sort of run, more and more amounts of data through more and more advanced models, thousands and thousands of times, right, over and over again. I want to start with Rachel here because, Anthropic has positioned itself as sort of the company most concerned about the existential risks to humanity related to AI. I think that's often framed as sort of the model capabilities and the risks posed by that, whether that's human beings one day, taking them and doing bad things, or maybe even humans losing control of the model and, we were in the Terminator situation. But I think there's also existential risks around, people would say there can be existential risks around climate, around sort of the energy use. And I'm just curious, the extent to which Anthropic is factoring that into their sort of mission when it comes to avoiding these sort of risks. To what extent is energy efficiency part of that equation, and what is Anthropic doing? Is it even possible, without sacrificing performance, to make your models more energy efficient?
I just want to acknowledge this is an extremely important issue, right? That we sort of find the best path forward and a solution, right, for developing this technology, this really important technology, this innovative technology here at home in the United States that we don't seed power to foreign actors to allow them to sort of take the lead on this development, while also driving towards a climate forward future. So a couple of thoughts and reflections. I think from our perspective, increasing energy capacity in the United States in order to develop these models, train future models, support inference is not mutually exclusive with clean energy, right? We see this as an opportunity for the United States to drive forward clean energy solutions and unlock clean energy that can help power the future of these models. And it's something that we're supportive of. I think something that Josh mentioned too is sort of the different use cases, right, that exist and how the models can be used to also drive energy solutions. So we have clients right now who are using Claude, which is Anthropic's model, to drive energy efficiencies in buildings and HVACs and to sort of drive down costs of energy and energy outputs. And so we're really optimistic, and we hope that more use cases along those lines will get adopted over time. And as models become more capable and more powerful, they'll be able to do more and more and more in that direction. So those are a couple things we think about. Our cloud service providers, our partners, Amazon, AWS, and Google, they offset their data center usage for computing. So we rely on them for that. And then we also work with Watershed, an outside organization, to offset our energy or environmental costs as well.
Great. So you kind of have to use energy now to save energy in the future by powering these new models that ideally will lead to more efficiencies. That's part of the
that's part of the calculation, right? But also hoping that the U.S. will use this as an opportunity to unlock more clean power here.
Sure. Ben, I want to turn to you on a similar question and actually kind of frame it in this sort of context of the broader AI ecosystem, because Anthropic was actually founded by a bunch of people who left OpenAI because they felt like it was behaving somewhat recklessly on some of these questions. And I think maybe that was about AI development, but when you hear Sam Altman, just casually talking about 5 gigawatt data centers across the world, across the United States, I think people also kind of raise their eyebrows and say like, man, this is like a really big project. This is the kind of thing that could potentially have a really big impact, positively, but also potentially negatively, especially if you pour all this money, this energy into something that turns out to not have the efficiencies and that kind of thing. And I'm just curious, OpenAI is very clearly engaged in this race with Anthropic, with these other companies to develop the best AI, sort of stay at the cutting edge. Could that come at the cost of the environment, of the climate? How much are you guys thinking about that? Is that part of OpenAI's calculus?
Yeah. So I'd respond to that by sort of making a point of like a historical and economics point.
Sure.
So we've repeatedly seen times historically where we hit a point and somebody says, hey, there's this fixed pie of resources. And whatever, an initiative that somebody wants to put forward is going to eat a part of that pie, and it's going to create scarcity. But in fact, what happens is you devote resources and innovation to a problem and you expand the pie.
Sure.
I mean, I was an analyst at the Department of Energy in 2008. I was sitting in the smallest, coldest office you could think of. And it was the time of peak oil. And everybody was saying, hey, look, we're stuck. Oil prices are going to go through the roof. There's not enough there to power the economy. And what happened is that it concentrated the mind, it concentrated industry, and it said, hey, you guys got to figure this out. And so new resources were invested in solving this problem, and it increased the pie. New types of technology, new types of infrastructure investment. And I could foresee a similar dynamic here, which is that you have this opportunity with AI because of this technology and these models and these use cases. And that is going to drive investments in things like clean energy and the grid and modernization. And yeah, that investment is going to be tied to this industry, but it's going to have positive externalities that are good for just normal consumers of energy, because you'll have a more modernized grid, or you'll have more, reliable power, or more green energy. This isn't guaranteed, but you see this pattern occur in other times. And so, I think that's one way to think about the questions you're raising.
No, I appreciate that. And it's actually a good segue. So, and I think probably, I'm oversimplifying, but probably the thing that killed the peak oil conversation was the sort of fracking revolution. And this, all of a sudden, we could get a bunch more natural gas. All of a sudden, we're talking about nuclear a lot, right? And I think, your corporate partner, Microsoft, is now looking to reopen the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. I know there's a bunch of other conversations in the works there. I can kick this to everybody. Do we feel like AI is going to be the thing that kind of finally wedges open the door on nuclear or reopens the door on nuclear? Obviously, it seems like the bet you guys are making is that sort of, I guess I'll go back to the hardware folks, and either one of you guys can pick this up, but to what extent should we be counting on nuclear to kind of power this? It's obviously a proven technology, but it's also, the infrastructure is kind of old. It's been shuttered for a long time. Turning it on overnight might be a struggle. What are your guys' thoughts?
So AI, can run on whatever power is available.
Yeah.
Of course, we want to use clean, carbon-free power wherever possible. I do think this is a really unique moment where there is so much motivation to modernize the grid and to expand carbon-free energy that, this is an opportunity for us to strategically deploy nuclear. So that's an opportunity. It's also, just more broadly speaking, an opportunity for us to do what we should have been doing for a long time, which is to make those investments in our energy infrastructure, to modernize it, to make it smarter, to make it easier to integrate distributed renewables and everything. So the evolution of our grid generally and the transition to more clean energy we've got a unique motivation because of the huge value in AI. And so, yeah, nuclear is an option. I think, it's one of the options that can help us solve the short-term pinch. And then longer term, we expect to see net positive impacts on energy and more broadly from.
Thomas, do you think that this explosion of interest in AI and this, I think, increasing concern about the amount of power it needs, is that enough to break the logjam on nuclear? Obviously, we've had disasters over a period of decades, most recently in Japan, but obviously going back to Chernobyl, that have really turned the public off on this. And I'm curious whether you think that there's anything that can turn that around at this point.
I think that the interest in nuclear is at an all-time high, both nuclear fission and fusion. I completely agree, except with one small caveat. I don't think that nuclear is a near-term option, because I think bringing in, unless, in the current regulatory framework, bringing in new nuclear is a longer-term time frame than at the rate at which AI data center growth is occurring. But I think it is a really important carbon-free baseload capability. There may be transition fuels like combined cycle natural gas, better than clean coal, if you will. So there'll be a number of solutions that will be intermediate, including, of course, renewables. But I think nuclear has to be, if you don't start today, it'll be 10 years to later. So I think that is an important part that we need to start today. And I just want to say that, when you talk about gigawatt scale data center, it seems like these are scary numbers. And they are. Yeah. But they are not that, if you think about even, if you look at the popular press, you hear many of the companies publicly have talked about 50,000 and 100,000 GPUs. Certainly the national labs, if you go to Argonne, there's about 60,000 GPUs. Oak Ridge, there's about 60,000 GPUs. Now today, these GPUs are about 500 to 600 watts. But in the next generation or two, they're going to be the kilowatt range, right? So you do the math, and you quickly get to a gigawatt scale data center. And so I think it is the demand, the importance of AI in addressing some of the significant challenges will demand data center capabilities of this scale. And so looking at efficiencies, not just, by the way, in the hardware, there's also a huge component where improvements in software and algorithms will also get you the performance without actually having to build out more capabilities. So it's actually, again, in all of the above, from hardware to software to algorithms to infrastructure, that you have to optimize around to get to this goal.
Sure, and I want to come back to the point you made about regulatory approval for nuclear in a second, and sort of how that could slow things down. But I want to go to what Ben said towards the top about this being a global race for obviously AI dominance, also, I think relatedly, energy production. So you just came from the government. You were working at the CHIPS office until, I think it was in August when you came over, is that right?
It was recent.
Okay, very recent, a couple months. And you were working on national security issues there. There is a lot of concern in the Biden administration, I think, on the Capitol Hill, just generally in Washington, when it comes to the export of advanced U.S. technologies around the world. I think AI chips and chips generally are probably at the very top of that list. And the administration has been quite aggressive, I think, in making sure that those exports, we don't send chips somewhere where we might regret it down the line, right? Whether that's China or Russia or somebody else getting access to our advanced technologies. At the same time, you're saying that we can't possibly build all of these data centers here in the United States. That there's going to have to be, what I'm hearing from you is that there's going to have to be some sort of export of these technologies to other countries in order to build out the data center infrastructure that the world needs and that your companies need in order to be successful. How do you square that? And does the administration, whether, I guess, it's not going to be this administration, but whether a Harris administration or a Trump administration, are they going to have to sort of balance the security concerns about exporting advanced technology with the just, fundamental need to build this stuff in other countries?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're in a competition primarily with China, right, across a whole host of issues. And for most of those issues, the macro solution is the same, which is the U.S. has to build a coalition. It's a size issue. China is a very large, centralized country, and it can use centralized planning to channel resources in a very direct way. We're a messy democracy, right? And we have to work with allies and partners around the world to have a coalition that can compete effectively. And that's the same in the technology domain. And I think the challenge with respect to export controls, and that's just one component, is how do you strengthen your close allies and partners, and how do you pull what could be called sort of non-aligned or middle groups closer to your coalition than to an alternative place? And that's the same with infrastructure, candidly. Where is this infrastructure going to be built? Is it going to be built through sort of centralized planning, like a China-backed infrastructure projects around the world? Or is it going to be built, in the United States or with our partners abroad? Like, that's the tension. And export controls are one tool and sort of how we manage that. It requires like a pretty nuanced approach, because when you're trying to control technology, if you attempt to do things that you actually don't have the ability to do, it backfires, right? Like, control what you can control, but don't attempt to do things that are available, out there anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a great question. Like, we can't know what the future is going to hold here, but it's very clear, like, what needs to be done at a strategic level.
So you don't think that the U.S. can afford to lock down its technology and just sort of like, just in our bubble, but maybe we can expand the bubble to European allies, Asian allies, and together we can all sort of, feel our way forward on this energy question and the data center question, and maybe we can make sure, the technology doesn't leave to China or to Russia, but it does stay in this sort of broader bubble. I'm just trying to make sure I understand kind of.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, this is not just a technology. This is the U.S. advantage generally, is our allies and partners, and it's everything from the military dynamic to technology and competition. We have to build those coalitions. There's no other way to deal with that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I don't know if you're speaking in Ben Schwartz capacity or the White House capacity.
This is just, honestly, like, this isn't a corporate issue or a government issue. This is just like looking at the world the way it is and seeing, like, how do you manage a problem?
Sure. I want to turn to Anthropic here for a second, because, obviously you guys are talking to the government about all of this stuff. All of you are, all the time. And there's a lot of interest in Washington on this topic right now. I mean, I've just noticed it in September. All of a sudden, it just sort of exploded. Maybe the data center conversation at the White House is what started it. I don't know. But all of a sudden, AI and energy is all anybody wants to talk about. Is DC kind of behind the 8 ball here? I mean, this didn't come out of nowhere, right? And there was, we're almost 2 years out from ChatGPT being released and kind of all of this starting. And I think DC for a very long time was focused on the model capabilities, whether for good or for ill, and how should we regulate? Should we focus on innovation? And now all of a sudden they're talking about energy. And I'm just curious, whether you feel like this would have been a better conversation to have 2 years ago, and if you feel like regulators are ready to tackle this right now, any part of the conversation or the problem.
It's a great question. I certainly, can't speak too much to what goes on behind closed doors on Capitol Hill or in the administration. I certainly don't know. I'm not there anymore. But, I think one thing that you note that's been really encouraging, generally speaking, is just the bipartisan interest across the board in regulating AI and ensuring that AI is developed in the U.S., that the U.S. maintains its lead in innovation, and that this technology can flourish here, but also with the focus on safety and responsibility. So that's something that's been really exciting to see. And of course, Congress passed the Advance Act this Congress to sort of expand nuclear capacity. So there is some movement happening, and that's really encouraging. Whether or not they should have done it 2 years ago, or as this technology was sort of just coming out, hindsight's 2020. But certainly grid issues, energy issues go beyond just this technology. We've probably been in need of energy reform here for a long time, potentially decades, and, along with electric vehicles and other issues, there just sort of is maybe a perfect storm coming together at one time. But it's on policymakers' minds. We're seeing it now be in the forefront of the conversation. So I'm encouraged, and I hope that we're moving in a direction where folks can actually start making some progress.
Yeah, and you mentioned grid reform. So there was a big lobbying group in Washington that came out with kind of like their asks for DC policymakers to work on AI and energy, and that was a big part of it, was sort of modernizing the electric grid. Another thing was eliminating permitting barriers. I think probably not just for nuclear, like even things as simple as like power lines or that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of red tape that the industry sees around that. Helping approve alternate sources of power. So again, that's particularly a nuclear thing. And actually, I'm going to go to Josh for this one. I'm curious if you those are all kind of obvious solutions at some level. Just like basic upgrading the hardware, upgrading the infrastructure. But if there's the one thing that's the most important thing the government could do, or maybe the easiest thing they could do the most quickly, is that just permitting reform? Is it doing something to modernize the electric grid? I'm not exactly sure, what role Washington would have to play in that. But I mean, if you could just sort of lay out the 90-day or 180-day plan that you would love to see Washington do when it comes to getting the infrastructure ready for what's coming.
So I think permitting reform is an important piece of the puzzle. NVIDIA, we're not as close to that as some of our customers and partners.
Sure.
One thing that the government we think should do, and is starting to do, is to start setting an example and deploying accelerated computing and AI for good at, for example, our national labs, and demonstrating not only that this is a useful technology, but that it's also energy efficient and can be driving real near-term energy reductions to help mitigate the challenges that the grid is facing. So I think on the policy side, definitely a lot of work to do to try to make it easier to deploy new clean energy, make it easier to modernize the grid, upgrade it so that it's smart technology, again, so that the renewables are easier to integrate, and then also to set the example of deploying the technology for good to spur further innovation and further use.
Yeah, those are the short-term sort of granular things DC could do. I want to turn to Thomas, the former national labs guy. So could you want to talk about moonshots and, funneling 1/6 of the country's power into one facility? What would be the ideal scenario for you? I mean, if for government, what sort of moonshot program? And I'm not saying it's feasible. It doesn't have to be feasible because we know how dysfunctional DC is. But if they could do everything you wanted tomorrow, what would be the best thing government could do to get us ready for this data center explosion, for this boom in AI that everyone says is coming?
I mean, I think to echo everything that has been said, first of all, AI enjoys bipartisan support, which is not the case for many things. I think this is very, very good. So it creates an environment where some of those moonshot type of questions can be asked and addressed. Secondly, there is deeper engagement facilitated by SCSP and others, so that there is, you have to inform so to have better understanding. The global context of it, the China thing has been mentioned. Well, so there is clearly a policy move to slow things down in terms of proliferation of technology. The important question that you ask is that, okay, you slow things down, what are you going to do? Because if you don't do anything to get into that, to take that period of 4 or 5 years to position U.S. for leadership, then we haven't accomplished anything. And I think so the near term, what I would classify as a moonshot is really to try to address this sort of systems and the idea that government has an important role in driving innovation through research and development, workforce development, inform and also increase the adoption of AI for driving innovation through small businesses and in a mid-size, because the big hyperscalers are continuing to drive this thing forward. So I think there's an opportunity to cast a government program that drives innovation economy-wide, and specifically doing things at scale. And at the scale meaning that in order to be relevant, U.S. government has to do at the same scale as hyperscalers are doing at the national labs and other places. That is going to make a huge difference in my view.
Yeah, and we'll see. Again, I think Senator Rounds was quite concerned that if DC doesn't get its ducks in a row, there's going to be a real bottleneck that we face in the AI industry. So we'll see where that goes. I'm running out of time, but I have one very quick question, and I am a reporter, so sorry, but I have to ask a question about the election. It's coming up in a couple months. Actually, not like a month. And it's AI related and energy related. I'm going to go to Ben for this. There, obviously, Vice President Harris and former President Donald Trump have both talked a pretty good game on AI as far as you guys are concerned. To Thomas's point, it's very bipartisan. I've mostly heard Republicans talking about energy, though. I don't hear that a lot from Democrats. It's largely a GOP-driven issue when they talk about AI, and that's what they want to talk about when they talk about AI. It's energy, energy, energy. Would Republican leadership be better for you guys on this question?
Is that not a sufficient response?
Well, what, a laugh? I don't know.
There's absolutely. First of all, it's an unknowable question. I have no idea. I've been told, a mentor of mine made the point years ago. He said, it's much better to predict the past than to predict the future.
Yeah.
You're just much safer there. So I'm going to stick with that.
Okay.
I haven't noticed what you've noticed on that either. So.
Got it. Okay. Well, it is mostly Republicans right now, but we'll see, just on the energy question particularly, but I guess we'll see. I wonder, Rachel, I'm going to make you grab the third rail here.
Yeah, sure. We'd be excited to work with, both parties. We are working with, both Democrats and Republicans on this issue. And so, as you noted, the White House had their energy event very recently. So I think this is on the agenda for everybody. And so we're here to work with all to unlock this energy reform issue.
And that is fair. The White House has been talking about this. I think it's just in Congress, especially, you largely hear it in the energy context here from Republicans. So, but that could change. And I think AI, very, very worth noting that AI is a bipartisan issue across the board, at least in broad strokes. Well, that is time for us. So I want to thank our panelists and thanks everybody for tuning in and being here in person. Appreciate it.